Early in the morning, before the sun had fully risen over the mountains, mist draped over the winding trails. CEO Tuan drove his truck down the quiet road, taking Tu Tien away from the cave. After a night of rest, she was feeling better, though traces of exhaustion still lingered on her face. She remained silent the entire ride, her gaze distant and thoughtful. She wasn't used to being treated with kindness. Tuan glanced at her occasionally but didn't say anything, giving her space to process everything. As they drove down a narrow path, Tuan suddenly noticed an elderly woman sitting by the roadside, clutching her leg, wincing in pain. Nearby, a large bundle of firewood lay scattered on the ground. She must have been on her way home when she twisted her ankle. Tuan immediately pulled over. "Let's see if she needs help." Tu Tien nodded and quickly stepped out of the truck with him. She knelt beside the old woman, her voice filled with concern. "Grandma, are you all right?" The elderly woman looked up, pain evident in her eyes. "I twisted my ankle. I can't walk. But I need to bring that firewood home to cook breakfast." Tu Tien glanced at the heavy bundle of wood, then turned to Tuan, determination flashing in her eyes. "I'll carry it for her." Tuan nodded and said gently, "We'll take you home, don't worry." He carefully helped the elderly woman up while Tu Tien hoisted the bundle onto her shoulder, even though it was quite heavy for her. Walking down the narrow dirt path to the woman's modest home, they moved slowly, making sure not to hurt her any further. When they arrived, the old woman's face was filled with gratitude as she invited them inside. "Thank you both so much. I don't know what I would have done without you." Tu Tien set the firewood down and smiled softly. "It's nothing, Grandma. This is the least we could do." Tuan reached into the truck and pulled out a small carton of milk, placing it in her hands. "Take care of yourself. Don't carry heavy things like that anymore." The old woman looked at them with teary eyes, expressing her thanks over and over. As they left her home, Tuan and Tu Tien continued their journey back to his house. When they arrived, Tu Tien hesitated at the gate. She had never stepped foot into a place this elegant before. A part of her felt uneasy. Did she really belong here? Sensing her hesitation, Tuan spoke gently. "Don't worry, just come in and rest for a bit." After a moment of reassurance, Tu Tien finally nodded and stepped inside. She didn't know what the future held, but at least for now, she didn't have to face it alone. Phuc's pickup truck came to a stop in front of his grand estate. Sitting in the passenger seat, Tu Tien gazed silently at the towering iron gates ahead. A strange feeling settled in her chest, part awe, part unease. She had never stepped foot in a place this luxurious. The polished stone tiles, the intricate architectural details, everything here felt unfamiliar to someone who had spent her life surviving alone in nature. Tuan turned off the engine and looked at her, his voice gentle. "Come on in. Think of this as your home." Tu Tien tightened her grip on the hem of her sleeve, hesitation flickering in her eyes. Should I really go in? This place? It's not meant for someone like me." Tuan smiled patiently. "There's no rule saying you can't be here. You've spent your life helping others. Today, let someone help you for a change." His words felt reassuring, easing some of her apprehension. Taking a deep breath, she slowly stepped out of the truck. The moment she entered the house, a wave of astonishment washed over her. Everything was pristine, meticulously arranged. The rich wooden furniture exuded warmth, while still carrying an air of quiet sophistication. Phuc led her to the sofa and poured her a glass of water. "Here, have some water. You've had a long day." Tu Tien accepted the glass, sipping it in small gulps. The strangeness she felt started to fade little by little. After a moment, Tuan spoke again. "I've prepared some clean clothes for you. Take a shower. You'll feel better." Tu Tien blinked in surprise. She hadn't expected him to be so thoughtful. No one had ever cared for her in this way before. "Thank you, but I don't want to trouble you too much." Tuan shook his head. "You're not troubling anyone, you're exhausted. You need to take care of yourself. Go on, freshen up, then have something to eat." Looking into his sincere eyes, Tu Tien finally nodded. She stood up, took the clean clothes, and made her way to the bathroom. The warm water washed away the layers of dust and fatigue that had clung to her for days. Meanwhile, Tuan headed to the kitchen. He wasn't someone who cooked often, but tonight he wanted to prepare a meal himself. For her. For the girl who had endured so much yet still found the strength to stand tall. He opened the fridge, gathered the ingredients, and began cooking. He didn't say it out loud, but deep inside, something in him had changed. A special kind of care had begun to take root in his heart. In the spacious kitchen, Tuan carefully prepared a meal for Tu Tien. He wasn't someone who cooked often, but tonight, he wanted to make something himself. A warm bowl of chicken porridge to help her regain her strength. The comforting aroma of simmering broth mixed with fresh green onions, filling the quiet house with a sense of warmth. Out in the living room, Tu Tien had changed into fresh clothes and sat on the sofa. The stillness of the large home, the crisp air, it all felt unfamiliar to her. For years she had lived alone, accustomed to quick meals and restless nights. But now, someone was worrying about her, tending to her well-being, making sure she ate and rested. It unsettled something deep inside her, as if her heart was being pulled in a direction she hadn't expected. She leaned gently against the armrest, her gaze wandering around the room, lost in thought. Suddenly, a wave of dizziness washed over her. The room spun, and she gripped the sofa to steady herself. Yesterday had drained her. Working tirelessly, the stress of her shelter being destroyed, it had all taken its toll. Her body was running on empty. She tried to take slow, steady breaths, but her vision blurred. Before she could do anything, her strength gave out. Her body slumped against the sofa, unconscious. At that very moment, Tuan emerged from the kitchen, holding the steaming bowl of porridge. His voice was gentle as he spoke. "Tu Tien, the porridge is ready, you should eat some." But as his eyes landed on the sofa, the scene before him made his heart stop. Tu Tien lay motionless, her face pale, lips colorless. The bowl nearly slipped from his hands, but he quickly set it down on the table and rushed to her side. "Tu Tien, what's wrong?" Kneeling beside her, he gently shook her hand, but she didn't respond. Her breathing was faint, her skin ice cold. A wave of panic surged through him. He had never seen her so fragile, so lifeless. Without hesitation, he scooped her up into his arms and strode quickly up the stairs. "Someone get the doctor, now!" His voice was sharp, urgent. The house staff scrambled into action, rushing to make the call while Tuan carefully laid her on the bed, pulling the blanket over her. As he looked at her pale face, something heavy settled in his chest. Why had she pushed herself this far? Why hadn't she told him? The worry inside him only grew stronger. He couldn't quite put a name to the emotions stirring in him. But one thing was certain, he wasn't going to let her suffer like this anymore. Tuan sat at the edge of the bed, his gaze filled with worry as he looked at Tu Tien, still unconscious. The bedroom door swung open as the doctor and nurse entered with medical supplies. Tuan immediately stood up, stepping aside to give them space. "She's severely exhausted from overworking and not eating properly. Her body is extremely weak. For now, we'll administer an IV to restore some nutrients, but she needs to rest and maintain a proper diet to recover." Hearing those words, something in Tuan's chest tightened. How long had she been fighting alone like this? So much so that she had forgotten to take care of herself. Standing nearby, he watched as the nurse carefully inserted the IV needle into her hand, letting the fluid slowly drip into her weakened body. Tuan's eyes never left her, his heart filled with a deep ache. Once the doctor finished the examination and confirmed that her condition was stable, Tuan walked them out, instructing firmly, "If she needs anything, let me know. I want her to have the best care possible." After they left, he returned to the bedroom. Tu Tien was still fast asleep, her face pale against the pillow. Tuan let out a quiet sigh before stepping out and heading downstairs to the kitchen. There were maids in the house, but this time he wanted to prepare something himself. He didn't want her waking up feeling even weaker than before. Opening the fridge, he took out rice, minced meat, and some vegetables. He set a pot on the stove and started rinsing the rice, preparing a warm bowl of porridge. The soft bubbling of boiling water echoed through the quiet kitchen as the aroma of the dish slowly filled the house. He stirred it carefully, making sure it didn't burn. Once the porridge was ready, he scooped some into a bowl, blew on it lightly to cool it down, and carefully carried it upstairs. Just as he reached the room, Tu Tien stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering open. Her eyes were still hazy with sleep, and when she saw Tuan, she looked a little surprised. "You?" Her voice was hoarse. Tuan gently set the bowl on the bedside table and helped her sit up. "You're awake. Eat a little. The doctor said you need to regain your strength." Tu Tien blinked in surprise. She never expected that Tuan, a busy CO, would personally cook for her. "You made this yourself?" Tuan nodded, his expression serious. "Just eat, then get some more rest." She hesitated for a moment before picking up the spoon, taking a slow bite. A warmth spread through her with each mouthful. Not because of any special seasoning, but because of the sincerity behind it. No one had ever cared for her like this before. As Tuan watched her eat, he let out a quiet breath of relief. Maybe, for the first time, he truly understood what it meant to care for someone. After finishing the warm bowl of porridge that Tuan had personally made, Tu Tien felt noticeably lighter. Though exhaustion still lingered, she could tell her strength was slowly returning. Seeing her eat every last spoonful, Tuan felt relieved, but he still reminded her firmly, "You're still weak. You need more rest. Don't push yourself too hard." Tu Tien nodded, gratitude shining in her eyes. It had been a long time since she had felt this kind of genuine care from someone else. After making sure everything was settled, Tuan quickly changed into fresh clothes and left for the construction site. Work was still piling up, and he needed to personally inspect the situation. At the construction site, when he arrived, a group of workers stood gathered near the partially built bridge, their faces filled with concern. As soon as Tuan stepped out of his car, he sensed something was wrong. One of the site managers hurried over to report. "Mr. Tuan, the heavy rain last night caused severe flooding. The water level rose too fast, completely submerging part of the construction site. The bridge area is heavily flooded and the locals can't get across." Tuan frowned and walked quickly toward the site. Before him, the rushing water had eroded parts of the foundation, causing minor landslides. On the other side of the riverbank, several residents stood stranded, unsure of how to get across. Without hesitation, he turned to the engineers, his voice firm. "Assess the bridge's structural integrity immediately. If there's any risk of further erosion, we need to reinforce it right away." Then, facing the workers, he gave additional instructions. "We need to build a temporary safe passage for the residents. Use sandbags to block the water and create a stable path for them to cross." The team quickly got to work. Under Tuan's direction, they stacked sandbags to form a makeshift walkway, providing a safe route across the flooded area. Nearby, an elderly woman stood anxiously by the road, her eyes filled with worry as she watched the rushing current. Tuan approached her, gently taking her hand. His voice was reassuring. "Don't worry, Grandma, we'll get you across safely." Personally guiding her step by step, he ensured every movement was steady and secure. He didn't just oversee the operation, he actively helped those in need. Once the last group of residents had safely crossed, Tuan let out a quiet sigh of relief. The flooding had caused delays, but the most important thing was that no one had been harmed. Turning back to the engineers, his voice was steady but commanding. "We need to reinforce the foundation today. I don't want any risks delaying the project further." As he watched the water continue to surge, Tuan understood that his responsibility wasn't just to build a bridge, it was to ensure the safety and well-being of everyone who relied on it.
Nỗi đau không còn dừng lại ở những lời miệt thị khi mẹ chồng lớn tiếng đuổi cô ra khỏi nhà. Tự tin gần như quỵ xuống, cô không biết mình đã làm gì sai ngoài việc sinh ra một số phận bất hạnh. Ngày cô về nhà chồng, cô cũng từng e thẹn bước qua bậc cửa này mang theo bao ước mơ về một mái ấm. Nhưng hôm nay cũng chính bậc cửa đó cô phải rời đi trong tủi nhục, trong sự lạnh lùng của người chồng. Trong ánh mắt khinh bỉ của cả gia đình chồng, cô muốn phản kháng, muốn hỏi chiến rằng anh ta còn chút tình nghĩa nào dành cho cô không. Nhưng rồi cô nhận ra điều đó chẳng còn quan trọng nữa. Cô chỉ là một món đồ bị vứt đi, bị thay thế bởi một người khác. Tự Tiên bước ra khỏi căn nhà đã từng là tổ ấm của mình. Bước chân cô nặng nề như có ai đó trói chặt. Trời không mưa nhưng làm cô bão tố. Những giọt nước mắt mặn chát lăn nhài trên má hòa vào nỗi đau đớn cùng của một người phụ nữ bị phản bội. Vô chẳng mang gì ngoài bộ quần áo cũ